chair of the working group of Indigenous populations, that she expected that this framework, this way of thinking about it, was going to help, she thought, in loosening up ways of thinking. And I have no idea whether it did, but it was my small attempt to be part of starting off the UN Declaration, which took another 10 years. Before around 2005, it was finally ready, and it wasn't that much different from the declaration that I was speaking about that had evolved over the first 10 years. But there was some give and take. There was some more fulsome recognition of the relative nature of rights, the relational dimension, things that might otherwise look like caveats. At the same time, other parts of it became even more fulsome. And I think that was as a result of people, states, beginning to listen with broader minds and more open hearts. But listening throughout the entire time to organizations, representatives of Indigenous peoples around the world speaking for themselves in their own kind of normative way, while at the same time working in full partnership with a fully modern international text that had to be something that everybody could come away with and say, okay, we all agree to this. And I know Romeo was so much more expensive and involved in that part of it than I was. And it's why it's quite exciting that Romeo has this bill in the House. We only have a year left before the next election, so whether it will actually, where it will go, I'm not sure. Do you have, is it going to come up this fall? This fall? Okay, we will have a chance to debate it. This will be very interesting. This bill alone could have a profound influence on our legal system. The way in which it layers the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and surrounding principles onto our legal system in a way that isn't any longer left hostage to individuals having to constantly come up with reinventing the argument that courts should be looking to this. They will be mandated to do so. Will, I think, work profound changes in our legal system. Which is kind of why I expect that it will be valid. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I spent the afternoon looking through the internet at various articles on the Declaration and Canada's response to it, and I must say that tonight is being extremely illuminating, much more illuminating than Google, and I think we can all attest to that tonight. Is there a microphone that we can use? We're now going to enter into our Q&A time. So I'm sure that there are a lot of questions out there. Thank you. I have a question, just to start off. Can everyone hear? It sounded to me from what you were saying that there are some really deeply entrenched stories, and that we have to change those stories. And you're saying that one of the ways that those stories can be changed is by Canada adopting this declaration, or making it possible, or making it mandatory for the courts to take the declaration into consideration when it interprets our laws. Are there any other ways you see this? Are there any other ways that this story can change, this deeply entrenched story that seems to be a really wrong story?
Test. Is this right?
Oh, do you want to use the mic?
Yeah. Oh, attorney. I knew this signing up.
Well, first of all, let me just say, I spoke at the beginning of my remarks about the residential school experience that I went through. And, you know, one of the sad things, although, I don't know if you heard the apology that Stephen Harper made on your behalf for that horrible experience in the House of Commons some 5 years ago now, almost. Those were strong words of apology to us that had to go through that experience. And I had high hopes during that day, but what unfortunately happened afterwards has nothing to do with the apology. I cannot, on one hand, say I'm sorry to someone, on the other hand, continue to trample his most basic rights. It doesn't work that way. So that apology was not sincere. I really meant to say that. One of the problems that we continue to have in this country is that throughout the history of Canada, the federal government has always fought against the rights of the First Peoples in this country. Continuously. Every single court battle that we've had for the courts, Canada was an adversary to Aboriginal rights. And Indigenous peoples are the only group in this country that are subjected to that discriminatory treatment by the government of Canada. That's one thing. The other thing I did in response to the question was I put in an order question that we call, it's just a question that we submit to the government as MPs, as parliamentarians. What I asked is that for the government of Canada to provide me with figures, how much each department spends annually fighting Aboriginal rights in courts. I estimate that number to be upwards $300 million a year. So, because every time I've worked with Aboriginal organizations throughout my life before becoming an MP, and every time there was that proposed legislation before a provincial legislature or Parliament of Canada, there was always a problem with that legislation being incompatible with our rights or incompatible with certain provisions of our treaties. So we had to go to court every time that happened. That is one of the things that I want to avoid in the future with my proposed private member's bill. Let me check every legislation that comes through to make sure that it respects Aboriginal rights and treaty rights. That's going to be the positive effect of that bill. And that's the one thing that I would like to achieve as a member of Parliament.
Does this work?
Yeah.
It does, sort of. Okay. Yeah, I'll just pile on a bit. The fact that the Romeo's bill would be a directive to the courts is one thing, but that never works unless it's also internalized in two other spheres. One is within the legislative process, the whole process by which policy is developed and turned into law or regulations, that so many things should never have to get to courts because you expect that kind of public policy process to have internalized. Right now, we're living in an era, the last 10 years or so, when under the Harper government, Aboriginal people's rights and charter rights are literally, it's a mockery of what they, in terms of the extent to which they actually check legislation against those pieces of the Constitution, let alone the values represented by them. But the Declaration will really have done its job if throughout the legislative culture, civil service, and then to an extent Parliament itself, it begins to inform the policy that becomes law, and not just courts. The second thing is lawyers. $300 million are being paid one way or the other, as salaries or even to external lawyers, but the history of this country's tooth and nail resistance to justice for attorneys quite often, and often not really engaging in a professionally ethical way by challenging government to say, we can't go in and resist this. Their claim is right. This is the right thing to do. You should be settling, and you should not be dragging this out for the sake of dragging it out. There are books to be written, some articles have been written, but the bad faith relationship, both in the negotiating and in the litigation context between federal crown and First Nations, Aboriginal peoples generally, but First Nations in particular across this country, is another shame in our history, and it's a shame on the legal community as well.
Here, here.
I find it very interesting that you believe that the story needs to be changed at the legal level. I actually am a lawyer as well, so.
I'm actually here to relay a formal request from Chief Marcia Brown Martel of Beaver House First Nation to Her Majesty's loyal opposition to please file a legal intervention in the 60s scoop claim against the federal government, which is using the litigation process to basically deny justice. For those who are not familiar with the 60s scoop, you could pretty well consider it stage 5 of the Crown's policy of genocide, stage 4 being the residential schools, and the 60s scoop claim was originally filed in 2004, and it was conditionally certified by Justice Paul Harrell, and the Crown actually initiated an appeal, and it was certified once again, completely unconditionally by Justice Edward Billababa, and once again appealed by the Crown. So we've been fighting since 2004, and as you can imagine, it takes a huge personal toll, because there is no subsidy for this kind of battle, because the Crown will not provide any funding. However, they are draining the deep pockets of the taxpayer, and when we try to file for a Freedom of Information Act on precisely how much the Attorney General is charging the Canadian taxpayer to fight an unjust battle against the Aboriginal people of Ontario, because this claim is specifically Ontario-based, as far as the fiduciary duty of the Crown to look after the needs of the wards of the Crown, that was the Aboriginal children that were taken between approximately 1963 and 1984. And the grounds for this are the grounds of cultural genocide that are recognized under UNDRIP as well as under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And there are approximately 40,000 children across Canada who were shipped out to Great Britain, France, Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands. And the federal government, through Aboriginal Affairs, absolutely refuses to provide any information on these children, citing the grounds of privacy. James Anaya is aware of the situation because we have discussed it. He is waiting for further information through Aboriginal Affairs so he can institute a claim against the Canadian government in order to make sure that these children who have been shipped out to Europe are not deprived of their cultural rights and their birthright to belong to the nation that they were born into. So, as I said, we are asking for a legal intervention on the part of Her Majesty's loyal opposition in order that the process of litigation not be used to erode the rights of the Aboriginal people.
Well, thank you. It sounds like it's a case in point. My more general point of view, I think the most prudent thing to do would be to ask you to be in touch with us. We'll talk afterwards so we can find out more information. In terms of actually intervening in litigation, it is done actually. It's been done on occasion, but generally opposition parties don't get into court slightly easier way of forcing the government to answer questions, not just in the theater, the charade we call question period, but through the mechanism of written questions that can have sub-question after sub-question after sub-question, that civil servants are the first to answer before there's a little bit of, or sometimes a lot, of political vetting. And quite often, things can get turned up that can be very helpful. And both Romeo and I certainly have worked with civil society groups to frame some questions that are useful to their own struggles. So that's one thing that perhaps we could do.
Okay, I have a quick question over here. My name's Sandra Campbell, and I'm a First Nation woman. I'm Mohawk from Wata. And I reside in Toronto now, and I'm on the front lines. I'm in the front lines, sorry. And my question is a very short question. I thank you too for coming here and informing what work you've been doing. But being the person who I am, and a lot of friends who are allies, what can we do? Like I know you're saying that you're out there in Ottawa, you're in Geneva, you're lawyers, you're in the arena. But as the average person, what can we do? Just continue protesting, rallying, petitioning, or we just let them battle it out in Ottawa and hope and pray next time the election comes we'll vote, which is the luck of the draw. But any suggestions? What can I do?
Well, help change government.
Well, that's one thing that I can say. Because I've watched on the news, I've listened, I've read about all the bills and all the bills that went through.
Well, I think one piece that was missing in my earlier answer was, in fact, nothing gets done by politicians or ultimately by government without some connection to civil society struggles and ideas. And we don't quite know, we can't predict how things are going, but I mean, whether it's I Don't Know More or a bunch of other time is up kinds of initiatives from civil society. I think ultimately, if I were to say, how should you spend your next year if you've got a little bit of time here and there? It's figuring out which movement or organization you think has got it most right and put some energy into their efforts, because my experience is that working directly within the political process only gets us so far without pressure and kind of this imaginative opening of new ways of looking at things that only come through civil society agitation and inspiration. So, and at the same time, none of this would make much sense if government didn't matter, and if the party in government didn't matter. And I can say with full honesty that Prime Minister Tom Mulcair will be somebody who takes the legacies and the challenges with respect to Canada, Aboriginal peoples, Aboriginal persons' relationship amazingly seriously. And I think he probably shares my view that I stated, I think, when I stood for the nomination in Toronto Danforth, that if the NDP ends up as the first time ever federal government, and we don't, within our first mandate, not everything can happen at once, but within our first mandate, if we don't make a profound difference to the lives and the involvement of Aboriginal communities within the broader Canadian mosaic, but also just the social justice dimensions. If we can't come away after 4 years saying this is what we've done, I'm not sure what reason we have to have been elected in the first place. So figure out who it is that's really agitating in a way that's helping push understanding, and then in a year's time vote for at least one part, vote to get this government out of power. I won't say vote NDP, but
Perhaps I can add from an Aboriginal perspective. I've worked for many years for the Grand Council of Korea in particular, doing government relations, international affairs, negotiations, media relations, name it. And it took me a long time before deciding to make that move and run for Parliament. For many reasons, including my children, of course, but now that I'm inside, I always say to people when they ask me, so how do you like it? I always respond, I should have started earlier. I should have started earlier because there are a lot of things that we can do from within the walls of that house as MPs. Case in point is my private member's bill. The other thing that needs to be said about Aboriginal peoples and politics and elections in this country is that they haven't been, for their own reasons,